In a world that is increasingly rejecting Christianity, another faith seems to be replacing it: Satanism. Bigger, louder, and more misunderstood than ever before, because not all who call themselves Satanists are the same. What do they believe? What do they seek? And what lies beneath the surface? Today, the veil will be lifted by a former member of the Satanic Temple, the biggest satanic organization in the world. Here is the reality of atheistic Satanism. Hello and welcome back to the Almost False podcast, where I interview regular people with incredible stories. Today I spoke with a former atheistic Satanist, and we talked about the Satanic Bible, the different kinds of Satanism, and her experience as a member of the Satanic Temple. One thing that intrigued me is how she became a Satanist in the first place. So we talked about her journey to Satanism, and maybe more importantly, her journey out of Satanism. It's quite the story, and I don't want to spoil it, but if you stick to the end, your jaw might drop just like mine did. With that said, let's get into it with former atheistic Satanist, Tepe.
I've always been very mentally dissatisfied, I guess, with a lot of things in my life. So I've always dug very deeply about the truth of this and the reasoning behind that and the whys and the hows of life, right? So I started searching in college, or like right after college. I started searching and this was about 2018, 2019, I want to say, where I just started searching everywhere, right? And I have books on world religions, and I have the Book of Mormon, and I've got, Taoism books and Buddhism books, and, all these different just religious texts, right, that I would read. And I picked up Satanic Bible while I was picking up all of these different religious texts. And that one really drew me in because, let's face it, I'm a very alternative person. And I was like, ooh, look, something edgy, right? Like, I wonder what this actually says. And it was very taboo. And so that it was very alluring to me. And I bought that book along with several others and read through it in like a day, and actually kind of scared myself because I was like, oh, this is uncomfortable, because I actually believed a lot and agreed with a lot of what it taught.
Right. So I think a lot of people hear about the Satanic Bible. Not everyone actually knows what's taught. So can you just like outline what it is? Because it's not about spells, or it's not about like the crazy Satanism people think that it might be about. Can you just give us an idea of what the Satanic Bible talks about?
Yeah. So there's kind of two parts to it. And I haven't, a full disclaimer on my part, I haven't read it in a while, right? But from my knowledge, from my memory of it from like back in 2019, 2020, was there are kind of two parts to it, right? There's a first part, which I, for the most part, actually do still agree with, because most of that is like live your life and don't hurt other people. Right? Just here's how to be a good person, right? Here's how to, think for yourself, and you do the math and you do the research, and don't let anybody like indoctrinate you. And it was just a whole bunch of stuff where you kind of read it and you're like, if this wasn't called the Satanic Bible, I would probably agree with a lot of this, right? There were a few things in there that I still don't agree with. Like, I think one of the things was like, if someone wrongs you, destroy them. And I'm like, I don't know. I still think if someone wrongs you, you should probably just like pray for them, because they probably need it. But so there's that one part of it, but there actually is a second, like the back half of it, actually does go into detail about different rituals that like LaVey performed. And that is something that I never was like, because at the beginning of the Satanic Bible, it talks very distinctly about there not being a physical Satan. But to my memory, and I could be wrong, like, don't come for me, I could be totally wrong. It does talk about like these like demons that he was able to like, what's the word I'm looking for?
Summon.
Yeah. Where it does talk about like these demons that he was able to summon. And I don't know if that was like a metaphor or if it was like a literal thing he was trying to do. And again, I haven't read it in a very long time, so I may be speaking out of order. But that's, yeah, most of the Satanic Bible is mostly, it's like a philosophical thing and
Right.
not more of a religious thing.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to mention too, because I've heard about it, and every person that I've heard talk about the Satanic Bible talks about the beginning that you just talked about, that first beginning part. And I don't know if they actually get to the later part that's in there, but everyone seems to be thinking about the Satanic Bible as just a philosophical book and with principles on how to be a good person and stuff like that. And so that's what I wanted to kind of touch on. But I'm also curious because, yes, there were things that you didn't feel comfortable with in the church and you felt like you couldn't ask questions, but was there other reasons that maybe you were mad at God or maybe things like that that also contributed to the fact that you wanted to reject the idea altogether?
No, I wasn't mad at him. I just didn't think he existed.
Okay. So let's go into that because there's different kinds of Satanists, and some Satanists believe that Satan exists and they worship Satan. Other Satanists are more the philosophical kinds, like what we just touched on, and are atheists. Can you talk about the differences between these two, and explain kind of what an atheistic Satanist is?
Yeah, so I can only speak on atheistic Satanism, right? I do know of the existence of theistic Satanism, but I never actually practiced that. I did know a few people who were Luciferian, which is kind of a form of theistic Satanism where like they believe in and kind of worship and take the side of Lucifer before like he became Satan, and they look at him as like the light bringer, right? And then there's as you said, the atheistic side, which is what I can speak to. So I was part of the Satanic Temple in our local chapter in the state that I live in. And that form of Satanism basically is more of I'm going to get canceled for this. It is more of a political statement, and it is more of a social movement than a true religion. So they definitely believe that there's not a physical or spiritual entity that they're actually praying to. A lot of the Satanic Temple's like rituals and their ceremonies and things were like, they call it mind theater, where it's you're performing these things for a psychological internal purpose, and instead of what a theistic Satanist would be performing these things for an outward worship of an entity. The Satanic Temple was like an internalized kind of thing. You're doing this so that you can internalize it.
Okay. Talking about the Satanic Temple, I believe, now I could be wrong, but I believe it is the biggest satanic organization or coven. If it's not, it's one of the biggest. And I'm just curious, you having been part of the organization to some extent or being a member, what does it look like to be a member? Is there a place that you would gather in person, or is that online? Can you take us behind the scenes of what it looks like to be part of the Satanic Temple?
Yeah, there's our direct chapter never had, to my knowledge, or while I was there at least, we never had a physical like building or anything that we would always meet up at, but we would have meets in various locations where we would all come together inside the temple, right, which is like not a physical building, but a group of people, was a incredibly warm and inviting fellowship. I will say that most of those people in the temple would align with a liberal mindset. We had a lot of people who came from a lot of different backgrounds, and everybody was very welcoming of each other. We would have like potlucks where, we would invite the public to come, and, we would bring, food, and there would be like, people be like chili cook off, and we bring desserts and just be like, meet the Satanists. And, I think my favorite thing that, we used to do, or they used to do, was they had like a road that they had adopted, that we would go out and like clean it, right? So it would be like a highway pickup kind of a thing,
Okay.
where we would like remove litter and bottles and junk, right? And there would be people who would pull over on the side of the road and yell at us. And then there would be people who would pull over at the side of the road and be like, I love what you guys are doing. Keep doing the thing, and then they'd like throw up the horns and we'd be like, yeah, man. And they'd drive off. Right. But a lot of the temple was actually giving back to the community and doing like community service and community outreach. And we would do like donation drives in the cold months for like hats and gloves and diapers and, tampons and stuff. So it was very much a humanitarian effort on the inside, mixed with, now I understand it to be spiritually nefarious things. But if you look at it outside of a Christian perspective, it just looks like a humanitarian effort with a scary label slapped on it.
Yeah. And I want to get into that. I think that's actually very interesting. The fact that a lot of these people seem to be like people that are rejected and they're welcomed in this place and there's good things happening. You're helping the community. And it seems to be more like of a community club more so than a coven. Whereas like I've spoken to theistic Satanists before and it's very, very different kind of thing. But this on the surface seems to be pretty much you're just there to hang out with friends and to help people. But that's not it. You talked about rituals before. So we're going to get into that. And you mentioned that as like mind theater. I'm hoping that you can expand a little bit on that, on what the belief is, but also what the rituals are and what they look like.
The temple is very much an organization that will fight for religious equality in a sense that, well, if the Christians get this, then we should also be allowed to have this, right? So there was a while back, a few years ago, there was a 10 Commandments statue that was erected on, I think like a government property somewhere. And the Satanic Temple fought to remove it. And when if I'm not getting my story mixed up, which I might be, but they fought to remove it and it didn't get removed. They erected a statue of Baphomet and tried to put it out on government property as well, saying, hey, like in the name of religious equality, like if you can have yours, we want ours. And that's basically the whole reason for the temple. The reason that it got started is like they want religious equality, but they're taking it decently far, which is the reason that they have after school Satan programs as well, is because if you're going to have an after school Christian program, we deserve an after school Satan program as well. So that's another giant part of the temple. To answer your question about the rituals and mind theater and stuff, right? So the temple also looks at itself as a way to become self-empowered. There's a lot of theistic Satanism is very hedonistic, or atheistic. A lot of atheistic Satanism is very self-empowered and like hedonistic, where you're like, do no harm, but live as you want, right? But a lot of these rituals were, I remember one that I helped to write, and it was basically a ritual on like letting go of things that no longer serve you in life. And it was like, you had built, like we built like little stick structures and wrote down things that we were getting rid of on like a little scroll and like tied it and hung it in the middle. And we all built these things with the intent of like taking them all to one place and then just burning them all in the same spot. And that was more of like a metaphor and a visual representation of like an internal release of things that no longer serve you. So a lot of those things that they practice are an outward representation of internal transformation and change.
So a little bit like you would do, like let's say with a psychologist, you kind of write down the things that you don't want in your life, and you throw that in the trash as a symbolization that you don't want these things anymore. That's kind of what you're referring to, right? That's more or less all the rituals that you would do at the temple or in the temple.
In the chapter that I was in specifically, yes. Now the temple did have. And I haven't been affiliated with them for years, so I don't know if this still exists. I'm assuming that it does. But the temple did have like nationwide, like official rituals that they would release to all of the chapters. And they do have an abortion ritual that basically girl or a woman would perform before she got an abortion, to help her feel more self-empowered about the decision she was making. So it's things like that. It's things that are very much like an outward representation of an internal mindset.
Okay. And for you, because it's one thing to go to your chapter to be part of the Satanic Temple, but at home, what did that look like? Did you do rituals for yourself? Did you do things like that?
Yeah. And a lot of it was very much me taking from spell work that I had already done as a witch in the occult prior, and formulating it to where it fit in an atheistic worldview, but still made sense psychologically. Right. So, like I would have, and I remember making like, and this was weird to remember, but I remember making like a set of satanic prayer beads that looked very much like a rosary. And then writing out like a rosary-esque kind of prayer about just, and like repeating just like mantras like, I am safe, I am worthy, I am powerful. And it was just very like a self-empowering thing. A lot of it is very selfish. I will say, atheistic Satanism is incredibly just self-based. You very, very seldom would focus on anything that is not you in that structure.
Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to tell you about our extra content on Locals. It's where you can hear the beginning of our conversations, learn the practical applications of the testimonies, and get hours worth of other bonus content. All of that, plus the regular episodes without any ads. It's free to join, so why don't you come check it out by going to almostfalse.locals.com or by downloading the Locals app. The links are in the description. Now let's get back to the story. And did you come across some theistic Satanists? Because as like people don't typically make the difference. It's like it's Satanists, and I wonder if the two kind of cross together. If you kind of get along, did you have friends or did you come across theistic Satanists during the years that you were part of the temple?
Not in the temple per se, but when I was part of the temple, I want to say I think I was part of the temple while also working at a metaphysical shop. And in this metaphysical shop that I worked at, there was a girl, and I love her so much. And she, when I met her, was a Luciferian. So she was, for all intents and purposes, she was a theistic Satanist, where she worshipped like Lucifer and worked very closely with like Samael and Lilith and all of those like demons, right? And we had a few conversations, about like how it was very similar and the narrative is very similar for both of us, but one of us believed that it was purely metaphorical and like poetic, and the other believed truly that no, this was like a real legitimate thing and everything was happening. So that was the difference between me and her when we had first met and started hanging out.
And as you spent time with her, were there things that you saw, rituals that you saw from her? Because as a Luciferian or a theistic Satanist that believes in the devil, worships the devil, or prays or to the devil, does rituals like that, did you ever see something more to the atheistic part that you were at? Kind of a confirmation of what she was believing was not just like theory, but that there is something to it.
So I always have believed that magic existed, and black magic existed, gray magic existed. And there were a few times looking back where she had told me that, she had done some spell work or something. And then like this thing happened and I was like, I never actually witnessed her perform spell work. But we would have a lot of conversation about it. And I had gone to her house and like seen a lot of, the stuff that she used for spell work. So I do know that she was like participating.
And how did you reconcile that in your head? Because you were an atheist. You didn't believe that God existed, but at the same time, you believed that black magic and the supernatural to some extent existed. How did you reconcile these two together?
That is a scary question. I was so close to becoming Luciferian myself. And I had started in the very early stages. I was in the very early stages of communicating with like Samael and Lilith. And I started to become very comfortable with the idea that they existed, and they existed in a benevolent way for us.
I would be curious to know the percentages of people that start as atheistic Satanists, just not believing in God or anything, that actually do make the jump to theistic Satanism. Because the belief system, like you explained, is very similar. You believe it's pretty much only for yourself. It's very selfish, and it's the same kind of tenets between the two. The only difference is that one believes that there is something more to the world than the natural world, and the other doesn't. But I would be very curious how many people get into atheistic Satanism, and it works as sort of a funnel to get them into, like, not consciously, but subconsciously, or something that does happen as a result of it, become theistic Satanists. Do you know if when you were there, did you have friends that kind of make the jump over?
I didn't. I would be very interested as well to see what that data is, because that's what happened almost to me, and I'm sure that there are a ton of other people that were on that slope as well. So I'd be really interested to see that data.
Yeah. I want to go back to your mom, because you talked about your mom being a devout Christian. How did she react when she learned that you were a Satanist?
She didn't disown me, but it was like close, right? It was very much get your crap, right? Get it out of my house. I don't want it in my house. I don't want anything. And that includes you, basically. Right. So I pretty much got like kicked out. And we didn't have great communication. I mean, obviously we didn't have great communication around that. And I even remember, like, so my uncle passed away, and when he was in Ohio, and so the whole family went out to Ohio to go to his funeral. And the man that I was like seeing at the time came out with me, and he was also part of the temple. So you had two Satanists like going with a bunch of Christians, right? And I remember at the like dinner or something after the memorial, like being there and talking to people that didn't know, and then talking to people that did know. And there was a wide difference of the way that we were interacted with the people that knew that we were Satanists. And a lot of my family kind of like shunned me and shunned us. It's not a great memory.
Yeah, I totally understand that it must have been a difficult time for you. But if you don't mind, can you kind of go into more like the relationship with your mom? Because I'm curious how that worked for you, because that's not something that is very pleasant, and I would say is probably traumatic, or to some extent something like that, when a relationship with your mom, which by any, like everything that you've said, seemed to be relatively good before all that happened, to kind of be broken like that. Can you explain how that made you feel inside?
It was devastating. It's the only word. And the worst part about me becoming a Satanist was like having her change. And she's not the one that changed. I know that I was. But having our relationship change like that, when it did, the timing was horrible. Or maybe the timing was perfect. I don't know. But I don't know. It obviously wasn't great. And that's the one thing that I regret most about any of that experience, because I don't regret experiences in my life. Everything is a learning experience, and everything brought me closer to where I am. But that was so hard to see her that disappointed.
Well, yeah. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Thank you for being honest and open about this. I think it's important to have these kinds of conversations, because it shows that, you know, these things are real. There's real people involved, and it has an impact the way we treat others. But since we're already talking about your mother, and I'm sorry, this might not be the easiest part of your testimony to talk about, but she ended up being a big part of why you eventually rejected Satanism, but probably not in the way that people would expect. Can you tell us what happened exactly?
So 2020, while I am gonna cry. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna cry more. I'm gonna cry harder. It was 2020, and she contacted me, and she knew that at this point, I was considering myself, I was a self-proclaimed satanic witch, right? So I was kind of in the temple, but I was more had like my toes into like theistic Satanism, where I was like, I am performing, spells and rituals and stuff with an outward intent. And I was very close into that, and I was still like, reading tarot, and I was, doing all of these like the spell work and stuff, and like, smudging and all the stuff that like witches would technically do or traditionally do. And I got a message from my mom, and like we would talk every now and then, but we would never talk about religion and stuff. But I got this message from her, and she was like, can you come over and clean the house? Like, can you come over and like use your whatever you do? Because I hear there's footsteps. Like, I'm hearing footsteps in the house. And that was weird for me to hear from her, because she was very much like, you don't do anything in my house, right? So I knew that she was like terrified of whatever was happening. And so I went over and we smudged the house, and she just kept telling me about these like footsteps she was hearing, and she was hearing doors close, and she was hearing doors open, and like people walking around and stuff, and things creaking. And after a while, we found out that she wasn't actually hearing things that were in the house. She had a brain disease, and she was hallucinating stuff, and she was having delusions. And so I moved back in. I was living like an hour and a half away, 2 hours away at that point, and I moved back into my house to be with my family while she like, did her thing. And we went through, and it was like a 6-month ordeal, where it started in like July of 2020, and it just progressively got worse when she would see things, and she was hearing things, and she would forget who we were, and she would like hide stuff, and she thought we were like poisoning her, and it was really hard. And eventually we were like, we'd take her to the doctor, and the doctor was like, it could just be stress, it could be an infection, it could be, whatever it was. And I had like a hunch of what it was, and it turns out that it was CJD. She was in the hospital, and they finally did testing, and it came back positive, and she had CJD.
So for people like me and the others in the audience that might not be familiar, can you explain what CJD is?
CJD is Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, and it is a degenerative prion brain disease, where basically there are proteins in your brain that basically just eat your brain. And this is a very cruel way of saying it, but I don't know how else to say it right now, where your brain just basically disintegrates on itself.
And how much time did you have with your mom from the time that you learned that diagnosis to the time that she passed?
Like 2 or 3 months. And I would say that she I would say that she died twice, because the first time, and like my heart goes out to everybody that's dealing with like friends or family with like Alzheimer's. I don't like, I be blessed, you guys, be blessed, because that is so hard to do, you know? And basically, like, we lost her because she didn't know who we were. So, and like her personality changed. And then like once she was at the hospital, like she was really mean. She got really mean, and she was like throwing things and threatening to leave. And we're like, you can't walk. Where are you going to go? And she grabbed her keys to the car, and we're like, what are you doing? And like, and I remember, her just like throwing stuff and yelling. And then we finally figured out, like she went to the hospital. The last time that she was at the house, she left the house in a police car.
Well, my heart goes out to you because I have a family member dealing with dementia. I know that there's probably a lot of people listening to this that also have that, because it's very common now, and it's definitely not something that's easy to live with. And I totally relate to what you said by saying, died twice. It does feel like that. So my heart goes out to you. But if we can, I want to go back to you and your story, because this was important to know kind of what happened with your mom. But this was inevitable. It's degenerative. You know that she was going to die, and eventually she did. And as you talked about earlier with your uncle, the funeral was very difficult for your uncle. Now, for your mom, how is it for you to go to your mom's funeral that was a Christian as a Satanist, borderline theistic Satanist? Like, how was that experience for you?
It was so bad. So it was weird because I was very much on the line of, I'm like very close to being a theistic Satanist, or at that point, I'll say that I even maybe was. So I believed, that Lucifer and Samael and Lilith and all of them existed. So by proxy, I also had to believe that God existed, but I was on the other team. And when she passed, and when she passed, I was so mad, because I was like, this woman loved you. This woman loved you more than anything. And how could you take her from us like that, right? Like, I understand people die, you know what I mean? But why was it so cruel? It was like in the worst way imaginable, and we didn't see it coming, right? We were blindsided to it. So how could he take her like that? This woman that was trying to get, me to love him, and trying to get my brother to love him. And this woman that would read scripture and prayed every night, and she had prayer journals that we found after she died, like, why would you take her like that? And I was so angry. I was so angry. So I bought a Bible. Like I went to like a used bookstore and bought like the cheapest Bible that I could find, and I read it. I began to read it with the intent of circling and highlighting like every horrible thing that he ever did, right? I was like, and this is the reason that I hate, God. And this is the reason that, I hate God. And he did this to women, and like, he would smite us. And like, do you really want to believe in someone that would treat you like this and do you like that? And I was just like, I had all these notes in this thing, and then notes in like another book of like, here's me disproving why you do not want to believe in this God, because this is an evil and cruel God. And as I was reading it, it kind of backfired. And I started having legitimate questions, and I started I started breaking, and I kind of became more open to having my questions legitimately answered, and not just answering them in the way that I felt better having them answered in my anger.
So, in the hopes of debunking the Bible or proving that God was evil, you started reading and you realized, wait a second, this is not crazy. Like, this is not as bad as I thought. What was the next step in your process of kind of belief system and lifestyle? Like, what happened after your heart started softening? Or maybe what's the gradual process of your heart softening? How did that work?
So my mom, a little bit of backtrack. And this is just goes to show how well everything is so beautifully orchestrated, right? When I was in high school, I was very big into like theater in our drama club. And my mom was very big into anything that me and my brother were doing. So she was very involved in the drama club as well. And she had all of her drama kids and they all called her mom. And one of those drama kids is now a pastor. And I contacted him when she had passed. And I was like, hey, can you come out and can you do mom's funeral? Like, can you do her memorial? Because like she would have loved knowing that it was you, right? Because like she loved you. And he was like, absolutely. I would not rather be anywhere else. Like, I would love to do this for you guys. So he came out and he did her memorial. And it was a very like Christian thing is what she would have wanted. And at this point, I'm still like angry about it, you know? And, going back and like, this was probably like, I don't know, like a month later or something. And I'm reading this thing like angry. And I was like, I have questions now. So I hit him up. I messaged him and I was like, hey man, like I have some questions. If you don't mind, if you don't mind, meeting me somewhere for a while, I just kind of want to pick your brain about some stuff. And he was super open to it. And he was like, absolutely. Like, let's meet up. So, we met up and I'm the kind of person that's like, I'm very scientific. I'm very research oriented. I'm very rational. I'm very logical. And I'm very like, I can explain anything out of anything, right? Like I can justify this and this is the reason that this is, and it's all very meticulously thought out, right? So I went in with just guns blazing. I was like, I have all these questions that I wrote down, and he was very kind and very sincere and gentle with all of his answers and the way that he spoke to me. And at the end of our conversation, I remember we were sitting at the park at like a picnic table. And at the end of this conversation, he's like, you ask these really in-depth questions, right? And a lot of it's like apologetics kind of stuff. And he was like, I don't normally recommend like this book to people because it kind of reads like a textbook and it's like kind of like an academic-y kind of feel. But based on the questions that you're asking me, like I'm going to recommend that you like read this book. And it was Josh McDowell's, it was like the new evidence that demands a verdict. And I like looked it up on Amazon and I was like, it was like $40. And I was like, nah, I'm a Satanist. I'm like never going to read this thing. I'm going to spend $40 on a book I'll never read. And, but I took a screen cap of it. Like if I ever find it on like a used bookstore shelf or something, I'll pick it up. That's that part of the story.
I don't know why you're laughing. We're going to get to it. Before that, I'm just curious, like, can you give us an example of like one or two questions that you were wondering about that you maybe asked the pastor? Like, I want to pick your brain as to like, what were the objections or questions you had at that point in your life?
Yeah. So there are several places in scripture and where it seems like there is a difference in the words, right? So like if you go, I think it's even the gospel. I don't know if there's a place in Mark and I think there's a place in like Luke that they both talk about the same event, but they're both like one of them is missing something that this one said and this one's time was different than this one and that kind of thing. And I don't remember exactly what it was. I know that it was about like the ladies who had come to the tomb to bring like not embalming, but like to bring spices to like anoint the body. Right. I'm pretty sure if my memory serves that that's one of like my main questions. I have all these written down somewhere. I should have brought my book. But there was a disconnect there in my brain. And I was like, this doesn't correlate. Like this says something different than this. So it was very much like me looking in scripture and being like, you're not going to get me. Like this doesn't, add up. Like the timing is off. And he was like, well, you also have to understand that, these accounts were written by different people and, the Greek versus Hebrew used a different timeline sometimes. And, and the more, research that I did on that, it made sense that because like the cultures were different. And so it would make sense that they would write about it differently. But it was very in-depth stuff like that, where I was reading it and I was like, the science doesn't add up or the timing doesn't add up.
Yeah, and it makes sense that he would refer you to a book like that, because that's not typical questions that people have. Those are in-depth questions and there are answers to them, but it's not like straightforward and not everyone knows about them. So it makes sense that he would recommend the book. But talking about the book, at that point in your story, you still had not picked up that book. How did you get your hands on it? Because that's why you were laughing earlier. It's kind of incredible. So I want you to tell the whole story of that.
I can't make this up, right? I'm a very logical person, and this was the thing that really sat me up, and I was like, all right, you got me. I hear you. All right. That was weird and creepy. And so I had just started a new job. Some stuff went down at the metaphysical shop, and I was like, well, I don't want to do that anymore. So I had quit working there. And then I found a new job with a tech installation company. And it was my first day on my first day on the job. And I'm a field agent, right? So I'm like going out and like installing like TVs on people's walls and stuff. And so we drive trucks. And so I get into the truck with this guy who is like the guy that I'm training with. And he has a particular vehicle on this particular day. And he is the person that I am assigned to. So he gets in the car. I get in the car. I'm like super excited to start my day on my first job. And I like buckle my seatbelt. And right there in between like the center console and my seat was literally the exact same edition of that book that he had recommended to me 8 days prior. And I have the screen cap with the timestamps on it. And it was 8 days. And there it was. It was, and I like froze, just like, what? And so I asked him, I was like, hey, not to be like the weird guy on my first day, but like, is this yours? Right. And he looked at it and he kind of like laughed at it a little bit. And he was like, no, like a client left that for another agent, but nobody wants it. So it's just been in here since forever. And like, if you want it, you can have it. I was like, oh, all right. So you bet your butt it's on my shelf over there.
So that book, specific edition, I think he actually recommended like a special edition, not like the regular one. But anyway, like whatever edition that he recommended to you, which was very specific. And the book that you're talking about it's not like a popular book. It's like a very niche thing. So that exact book with exact edition was there. And it was there for the taking. Because you said, I'm not going to buy this book. I'm not going to pay $40. That was there for free. 8 days later.
Yeah, no, how nuts is that?
It's insane. It's incredible. But what happened after? Like, I imagine you probably picked up the book, but like, what happened that day? Like, what were you thinking that day after seeing that? And what did you do with the book afterwards?
I was like shaken the whole day, right? I couldn't really focus on stuff because I was just thinking about how crazy that was. So I took it home and I like leafed through it, right? And it wasn't even the things in the book, right? That's the thing for me was it wasn't even the things in the book that solidified my belief in God and in Jesus. It was the mere fact that it was even there. Because I can explain stuff, right? Like I can be like, oh, that's not a UFO. It's a drone with some, bubble wrap and LEDs on it or like whatever. You know what I mean? Like I could be like debunked. But as soon as that happened, I'm sitting back and there's the odds of that actually happening 8 days later with the exact, it didn't need to be a book. It could have been like a sandwich or, you know what I mean? It could have been literally anything for it to be for it to be a book, that particular book, that particular edition. And for him to just be like, oh yeah, take it. Like no one wants it. Like, haha, we've all kind of been laughing at the fact that it's even there was just like, I couldn't explain that, like the odds were so like a Googleplex to 1 or something. Like it was just unnormally small odds. And that's the one thing I couldn't explain. Right. And I think that that's really how God comes into a lot of our lives is in ways that we can't explain our way out of. And I think that those are the most beautiful times where he comes into our lives that we just can't explain. Because I can do all this stuff with the science, and I can try to, get you to believe what I say about like, oh man, and like, and like Jesus is alive and he's still like answering prayer, and like we have so much grace that he's given us and all this stuff. And I can tell you all of the things, and all of the evidence that, we found all of these places and, the timestamps of everything. And I can try to convince you, but it doesn't matter. Right. And that's what I learned with this, is that I have a whole book, right, of apologetics and all of the evidence, but that's not what mattered. The thing that mattered to me was that it even existed for me in the first place.
Yeah, that it was placed there for you specifically. Like that's literally what it seems like, and that's what I believe it is. That was kind of a message from God. But what did you do with the message from God afterwards? Because you were a Satanist, and like at the same time, well, your heart had been softening towards God, because you did mention that, but you still like were considering yourself a Satanist. So now you get this kind of call from God that shows you that he's real. What did you do with that?
Immediately was like, all right, everything else is gone. Just switch immediately, because like that freaked me out. So immediately everything's gone. Tarot's gone. All of my stuff. I had like a giant box that I gave my Luciferian friend. I was like, here you go. I don't want it. I'm playing for the other team now. Right? Like I have seen this, and this is true, right? Like this is the reality of it. Like I can't explain this, right? Like it happened. So here's that part of my life, and like, bye, right? Like peace out, and I immediately like went and got another Bible and just dove headfirst into it, and and started really building my relationship with Christ after that, and going to church and finding, my people. And I remember there was, the man that I was dating at the time. This is a different gentleman now, right? Because I had started dating another person. So while I was a Satanist, this was back in like 2021, and I was technically still a Satanist, right? And this is around the time that I had that conversation in the park where that pastor had recommended me this book. I started dating a different gentleman, and he was very avid Christian. And he was like, I know you're a Satanist, but I really would love for you to meet my pastor. And I'm like, I'll meet him, I guess. Sure. Like I have questions, I guess, like, and this is when my heart was starting to soften, and he met me, and I was like, hey, my name is Tepe. I'm a Satanist, and I have no idea why I'm here. Like, I don't know why I'm talking to you. Like, I don't really care. Right. It was very slow to soften. But his first reaction was, well, are you theistic or atheistic? And I was very impressed with that, because up until now, people are just like, repent, like you're going to, and he came at it with a sense of like legitimate curiosity, and he met me where I was. And that was a huge, huge like catalyst for me to be like, okay, well, not all Christians are like, you're going to hell, like it was very eye-opening for me to believe that I could be part of the faith again, and not be of that like flavor of it,
Yeah.
So I started going to their church, and it is an incredible church. Like I still like the pastors, both of those pastors and I are still very close. We talk a lot, and I'm very blessed to know them and very blessed to be part of that community. But they also really helped. So as soon as, the book thing happened, I was like, all right, cool. Everything else is gone. I guess I'm going to church now, and started, going to that church and starting to build a community, of fellow believers, and reading scripture like every night and praying all the time. And that's kind of all she wrote. And I was baptized in 2023.
That is awesome. Your story I find fascinating, and I think it's incredible. Just the odds of, like, it's not even odds. It's just literally God placed that book for you to be there on that day, and you picked it up, and it that softening of your heart, I mean, had already kind of started, but it was a very quick thing. Like, it was years of building up this knowledge about atheistic Satanism, and then just like it's what seemed like a few months, like you're like, no, this is like all that I thought I was convinced it was correct. Now, like, I know that this is false, and I know that Jesus is God and Christianity is the truth, which is insane. Like the rapidity rapidity. I don't know if I can say that. Like the speed at which that happened is quite incredible. I want to ask you because it seemed like you were kind of a different child more than other people. You talked about being alternative, and I'm wondering, like, what do you think is the calling that God put in your life, like today?
I don't pretend to know, right? We talk a lot. And I keep telling him, like, I will do whatever you want me to do. You just got to be a little louder when you tell me. And I think that's what a lot of Christians are waiting for, is like him to be a little bit clearer or a little bit louder. But I think that he really does speak in the silence, and we have to listen. So I'm still trying to figure that out. But I know that I always have, since this whole thing happened, I will always take any opportunity that I can to spread the gospel and to spread my testimony about Jesus and how, like, no, this is real. Like, he's still listening. You know, he answered a prayer for me the other day, and he is just, he listens, and he does still answer prayer, and he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Like, it's a beautiful thing. I don't know what my calling is yet. I'm just going with the flow, and I'm doing whatever he tells me to do in the moment, and say whatever he tells me to do in the moment. And that's all I can do.
That's a great answer. Many times we don't know what God wants from us or what his plan is. And similar to what you said, like, I don't think that I know exactly what happened, but I just want to point this out, that when your mom died, you were angry at God, and your question was, why would you do this to her? And you couldn't understand why there could be a purpose to all of this, but it's actually what ended up making you believe in him. So I just wanted to point that out as something that seems like he worked. Definitely, whether he caused it or not, he used that for you and for your good. So I just wanted to say that because I thought it was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I firmly believe that I feel like everything, I like to say everything happens for a reason, but I don't know if that's true. I will say that whatever happens, God will use it. Because I don't necessarily believe that, you know, God causes these things. You know, there's evil out in the world, and there's other things at play here. And so I don't necessarily believe that, you know, God causes these things, but I do believe that sometimes God will let things happen. Or when things happen, I always believe that when things happen, he will always use it for the good of you and for the betterment of the kingdom.
Amen. So as a last question, Tepe, I need to ask this to you. I always ask a version of this because people have experiences, and they have whole lives that they learn things from. And obviously you used to be a Satanist, now you're not. And I want to give you the opportunity to speak to someone that might be an atheistic or perhaps theistic, but atheistic Satanism was what you were into. If there's someone listening today that is an atheistic Satanist, what would you say to them?
I think that my main thing is just to remind people, right, that like there are going to be sects of Christianity or churches in Christianity or groups of people, little communities, individuals, right, in Christianity that claim to be Christian, but don't actually follow Christ. And I know that that's like a weird, that's going to get me canceled again, right? But I firmly believe that there are facets of Christianity where they are cruel, right? And that goes for anything on the planet, right? Like you could go anywhere, and you know, this department store is amazing, and they have wonderful people, and they're always organized, and you go to the exact same one in another state or city, and you're like, wow, this is just crummy, right? So I would urge you to not believe that because you had one bad experience, maybe as a child, or, you know, this particular church shunned you or embarrassed you or humiliated you, or you just didn't feel like you belonged and they pushed you out. That's them. That's not Jesus. That's people. And Jesus loves you. And he's not going to let you go without a fight. Like, you might not be seeing what he's doing in your life, but he is doing stuff in your life to try to bring you back. And you just have to be open to it. but there's not anything about following Christ that is cruel. And you're not hurt by God, and you're not hurt by Jesus. You're hurt by people.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Almost False podcast. If you want to know more about Tepe's childhood and her experiences with witchcraft, then click the first link in the description. It'll bring you to Locals, where you'll find all the content we make and where you'll get updated with what's happening with me and the channel. It's free to join, so don't miss out, and come check it out. I'll see you there. Stay blessed.